What's up everybody and welcome. My name is Alex and in this episode I'm going to review these Eibach Pro-Kit springs on the Daily Egg. The Daily Egg is my 1994 Honda Civic Hatchback. In the description I'm going to have details about the exact setup of my car, the springs, the dampers I'm running, the tires, bushings, and the tire pressures. So you'll have all that info in the description down below for reference. If you have any questions about my feedback or the setup, please feel free to ask in the comments. Or you can find me on Instagram at rotary_night, like knight in shining armor. And in this episode, I'm going to do a real simple sort of like ride and drive where you're going to ride shotgun with me. And I'm just going to talk about my likes and dislikes of the setup while actually driving on the road. And you can see it and hear it for yourself. So without further ado, let's go for a drive. Okay. So I figured I'd do a little driving and talking and give you a little bit of what I like about this spring setup, what dampers I have, and other things about the car, and why I'm changing setups here. You're gonna have to forgive if the camera's really bumpy. That is also in part, well, because of this suspension. And if the car's really loud, that's also in part because of this setup and why I want to change things. So I'm riding on Eibach Pro-Kit springs with Koni's orange dampers, the street dampers I think they call them. For these suspension arms, I'm actually using Energy Suspension's polyurethane bushings as well. So that sort of adds to some of my complaints about the overall ride quality of my setup. Now these springs were designed, my guess is, a long time ago. These weren't designed with the Koni's orange dampers in mind. And these Koni dampers are actually designed to work and coincide with lowering springs. It's not like I'm running an OEM style damper at all. These dampers are actually designed for lowering springs and are able to take the lowered ride height and these stiffer spring rates. One of my biggest complaints with this setup is the fact that, you know, I actually like the stance. I like how much it lowers the car. But the problem is the front is so low that there's just not enough stroke in the damper to actually activate the dampers so it can do its job. So it really results in a harsh ride. And you may even notice, so just on the drive here, how bumpy and how much rattling and noise that's going on from the interior. I'm gonna go to a real bumpy road here just to highlight some of the concerns. But you can hear, like over that crack, just hear everything, feel everything. Now I know the problem is twofold. Like I mentioned, part of that has to do with I just don't think the front end gets enough stroke to actually activate the dampers, especially in those sort of high-speed impacts. There goes another one. So the second part of the problem is the polyurethane bushings. You know, there's not a lot of compliance in those bushings. You know, some of my original ideas when I was piecing together this car, you know, at first I bought it as just a really cheap little daily. I think I bought it for $2,000. It had a fair amount of miles on it, but I'm only the third owner of the car. And I thought I'd build a really fun little lightweight machine that could handle really well. And it'd be like almost a semi-track setup on the suspension that I would daily and have fun driving through the twisty mountains here in the West Coast in California. But as I get older, I've sort of decided that I think I'm over that sort of approach and I'm more prioritizing comfort over sportiness. So I'm actually going to take off the polyurethane bushings and then go for a spring that is not as stiff, because I think the spring rate of these Pro-Kit springs is too stiff, and something not quite as low. The ride height of this is just barely meets practicality. It's a little low in some instances, at least in the front. In the rear it's actually okay, but the front is a little lower than I expect. Another issue that I have with this car is NVH. I'm going to make a separate video about NVH, and if you're wondering what NVH is, that's noise, vibration, and harshness. And one issue of the polyurethane springs you can hear on this road that's really coarse it really lights up the chassis and you just hear all that road noise coming through. But we'll make a separate video about that. So as you can see on that little road, low speed ride quality is quite poor in this car. That low to mid speed, when we're talking 0 to like 35, 40 miles an hour. And again, that's just because there's not enough stroke. The dampers can't quite do their job. There's even instances where the bump stops are being hit because of the spring setup up front. Now we're going to go on the highway. I'm going to show you some of my high-speed concerns about this setup. You feel the bumps in the middle of the lanes there, how harsh that was coming through. Let's see, we got some transitions here. Here we go. See, that's not too bad in terms of ride quality. But you can probably see me jumping up and down. And one of the other issues, the more severe freeways, especially when I drive this car like down in LA or somewhere in the Bay Area where freeways are really harsh, it's almost as if the front and rear axles, you know, they're not coupled together very well. So like the front will respond in one way, but the rear axle doesn't kind of respond in a similar way. And sometimes they're doing their own behaviors independently, and it's not really a natural response. And I've even gotten into some severe cases depending on the freeway. If you're on some sort of undulating roads, you'll get a lot of pitch motions back and forth like this in the car, and you'll be sitting here going just driving on the freeway. And you're probably wondering about handling. You know, handling's actually not bad on this car and this setup. If you have a smooth road, actually handling is pretty good, even with a slightly worn ball joint right now. Handling is actually not bad. Turning is pretty good. The only complaint on handling is the fact that the D series in this car is long gone. I now have a B series from an Integra GSR. And actually, let me do a little corner entry here. See, the car's nice and responsive on a nice smooth section of road like that. Feels good. So if you're on a track or autocrossing with this setup, it's actually not bad. And if you have some smooth pavement, it's when the bumps come in mid-corner that really disrupts this whole chassis and kind of kills some of the fun. But yeah, so one of my issues with this in terms of handling is, you know, I swapped in the B series, so there's a slight heavier engine now up front. I got a heavier powertrain up front compared to before, and this spring setup actually induces a little rake in the front. So we got some positive rake where the front end is lower than the back end, and now that rake is even more exaggerated with this B series engine instead of the D series. And what that does is it moves the center of gravity even further up front. So if you imagine the car rotates on its Z-axis, the vertical, sort of about that center of gravity, right? And the more that moves up front, the more the car rotation pivot point is further up front. And now you can feel that with this new rake that's been imposed with this setup. It's not necessarily bad, you can get used to it, but it's something that I don't like. So I think sort of my main complaint about this setup, just as a daily driver setup, is the front end is too low. And not only does that create like drivability issues and concerns just driving around town, but that front rake is a little, there's too much positive angle. I'd like to actually reduce that front rake a bit. If you look at the stock suspension setup and ride height, you'll actually notice it's actually got like a reverse rake, like a negative rake angle. And I think they did that in an attempt to try to push back the center of gravity as much as possible. And then I honestly just think that these springs were developed so long ago. So speaking of the springs themselves, you know, these spring rates are really hard to find. These are progressive springs on these Eibach Pro-Kit springs. They're progressive springs. The rates are not published. Eibach does not publish the spring rates. So it's hard to find. The only thing I've seen is they can be up to around 290 to 300 pounds per inch. And reference, the stock springs are somewhere around 120 to 160, if I'm not mistaken, pounds per inch. So it's about double of what the stock springs are. So these are just really stiff springs in comparison. And I honestly just think that when they develop these, if you go on their website, it says they were developed on an OEM damper or shock setup. It wasn't developed on aftermarket shocks. And at the time, you know, these Koni springs, or sorry, these Koni dampers weren't around. And so these springs were never developed with these dampers in mind. So I honestly just don't think it's a good matchup. So in my honest opinion, the Eibach Pro-Kit springs with the Koni orange dampers is not the best matchup, even though you could buy these as a kit. Now maybe if you're younger, you're in your 20s and you don't mind a little harsher ride, and that's okay. All right, so that about wraps up this review of the Eibach Pro-Kit springs. Obviously, I'm a little bit more concerned with ride comfort than actual handling. There's always a compromise between ride and handling when developing a suspension for a car, and it depends where you place your priority. Having a low, stiff suspension on polyurethane bushings really maybe is not my priority anymore. And I thought maybe I would do some autocrossing in this car, maybe take it to a track day or two. But in reality, life is just taking over and I have had no time for those things. Thankfully, in my line of work, I actually get to do a lot of driving at tracks and various locations. So that kind of gets my fix. But let's be honest, the RX-7 has been sitting forever. If there's any car I should take to the track, it's that one. So ask yourself, you know, if you're looking into this kit for your car, what are you really going to do with your car? You know, are you really going to take it to the track? Are you really going to autocross it? If so, then okay. Maybe the compromise in ride is worth the benefit of the handling benefits. If you're not, and you're more just interested in the look, well then, I think there's other options. Now, in the next episode, what I'm going to do is compare the new springs that I got for this car. And you may be wondering, why am I going with lowering springs and not just full coilovers? I mean, that's just a personal choice. You know I can go full coilovers and dial in exactly what I want. But I just want something that is affordable, easy. I have more than one option when it comes to dampers. You know, with the dampers right now I'm running Konis, but there's other damper options out there if I'm using a stock style spring. So the next spring I'm going to try are the I'm not sure how you say it, HX springs. So I think softer springs with a slightly higher ride height in the front and a OEM style bushing is really going to help improve the ride comfort here. And you're not going to see me bouncing around inside the car. So I'm going to go run to the auto store, get the things I need, and get started on making the switch. So thanks for watching this quick little episode and review of these Eibach Pro-Kit springs. Hopefully you heard me and my microphone didn't get